I felt every eye on the back of my neck long before Pastor Grayson's hand touched my shoulder. The pews smelled of polished wood and faint church coffee, the organ humming under the hymn like a distant, steady heart. My fingers were pressed so hard into the fabric of my navy dress that I could feel the seams. The pearl brooch I always wear, Harold used to say it made me look respectable, caught the slant of morning light and flashed as if accusing me. "Desiree Wilkins, could you come with me?" His voice was low, practiced. Not a question. 25 years in that third row. Sunday sun through the stained glass landing on my hands. I know the creak of that wood. I know the coughs, the little noises, the familiar scrub of hymnals. I did not know this. He guided me down the aisle, and the choir's voices blurred into one long, soft ache. People turned, quick, polite glances, then eyes away. Diane smiled in the doorway like a photograph, but it didn't reach her mouth. Martha's hand hovered on her scarf and then slipped away. My breath got shallow. I felt the church cool air on the back of my neck, and my chest tightened. "Here will be better for you today," he said, indicating the last pew, tucked by a column. He set my hand down gently, but the touch felt like a line being drawn. "But Pastor," my own voice surprised me, small and brittle. The hymn swelled. I pressed my palms flat on my knees to steady the tremor. Harold would have told me to breathe. I breathed, counting under the music, feeling the grain of the wood beneath my fingertips. I could hear the faint rustle of whispered names, Rebecca, Judith, like moth wings. He smiled. Not at me. After the service his words in the office were soft, careful, like someone trying to fold a fragile letter. "Eleanor, I respect you, but I've been told your donation might have motives that complicate things." He wrapped his hands around a Bible and leaned on it like a shield. Motives. The word landed heavy. 2 days earlier I had handed him a check, $25,000, Harold's legacy, tucked into an envelope the way we used to tuck prayers. I saw his face when I gave it. Gratitude, perhaps relief. I had thought of the kids, of a place where someone like Harold might have helped a boy feel steadier. I had not thought it would be read as a weapon. He looked at me like he was trying to spare me a scene. "Nathan told me that you suggested conditions. Influence. Control." I felt the color drain from my fingers. I only said I wanted the youth program to thrive. I said, "If Nathan would like to lead. Please, Eleanor." His hand fluttered, the smile worn like borrowed clothing. "I can return the donation. No need for trouble." I left his office with the scent of lemon cleaner in my throat. The parking lot felt too bright, the asphalt too loud. A text buzzed in my bag, vibrations like a small insect. A number I didn't recognize. "Mrs. Wilkins, we need to talk about your donation and Nathan. Library parking in 15. My knees went soft. Nathan? Panic was a cold thing settling like ice. I walked toward the back of the lot and saw Rebecca waiting, tablet tucked to her chest. Her glasses caught the sun. She kept tucking them up like a nervous gesture I remembered from monthly meetings. "Desiree Wilkins," she murmured. "I didn't know how to tell you." She opened the tablet. The screen was a small window of the church ledger and a thread of emails. Names, dates, amounts. A line where Nathan had annotated a transfer, $10,000, to a personal account, disguised under youth program expenses. Her breath made a small sound, half apology, half anger. The air smelled of cut grass and old coffee. Distant church bells marking the hour. "It started small," she said. "I thought maybe bookkeeping error. Then patterns." She adjusted her glasses again. Her fingers were steady despite everything. The pieces snapped into place, not like revelation but like a slow rot exposed. If Nathan was siphoning funds, then my donation would have threatened to expose him. If he could plant a seed, a whisper that I was buying influence, he could keep his scheme safe. I felt my cheeks heat. I felt Harold's absence like a hand on my shoulder. He had always said truth was a stubborn thing. He'd have tapped me on the arm and said, Go on, love. Walking back into the parish hall was like stepping into a quiet before a storm. The smell of warm soup met me, and folding chairs chatted as they were arranged. People looked up. My steps made small, decisive thuds on the linoleum. I laid Rebecca's tablet on the table. The screen glowed. "Pastor Grayson," I said. My voice was not as small anymore. It had an edge I didn't know I kept. "We need to talk about the youth program." Silence gathered like a curtain. Heads inclined. Judith's mouth compressed. Nathan's jaw set. Fingers white on the edge of a folding chair. He checked his phone, that restless tick. The brooch at my collar felt heavy. In that moment, the last pew, the place they'd sent me, became a position from which I could see everything. I let the quiet hold them, let my breathing slow until the rhythm of my heart matched the organ's distant echo. I didn't shout. I didn't accuse. I put the tablet between us and let the numbers speak. The room smelled of coffee and wax floors, of lemon cleaner and hope frayed at the edges. For once the church listened. 6 months later I still sit toward the back sometimes. Not because someone sent me there, but because from there I can see the whole room. I can watch young faces light up, genuine and unafraid. Nathan is gone, getting the help he needs. Pastor Grayson stepped back to reassess. The pearl at my lapel catches light in the same way, patient and steady. Harold's laugh is only in my memory now, but when I look across the hall at the kids in the new program, I think maybe he would have smiled. Justice was not a single thunderclap. It was a series of small, stubborn actions, a tablet, a text, a woman willing to walk back into the room. The air smells clearer now, and the hymn sounds truer. I felt every eye on the back of my neck as Pastor Grayson guided me to the last pew. My hands trembled so badly I pressed them against my dress to hide it. The hymn went on, but the voices sounded distant, muffled by the pounding of my heart. 25 years in this congregation, and suddenly I was moved from my usual third-row seat to the back. It had been only 2 days since I donated $25,000. My dears, thank you for spending a little of your precious time with me. This channel is still just getting started, and every new subscriber is a breath of life as we try to reach our first 1,000. If this story touches you, please click subscribe, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I love knowing where you all are. I keep returning in my head to that quiet morning 2 days before it all fell apart. I woke at 6 out of habit. 67 years of Sundays make a body rise without thinking. The kitchen was small and smelled like the coffee Harold used to grind himself. A warm, bitter comfort that filled the room and reached into the corners where the sunlight pooled through the floral curtains I sewed 3 summers ago. I can still see the tiny stitches along the hem. Harold always said I made even the simplest things look dignified. I had the check folded in my wallet like a prayer. $25,000. It felt heavy in my palm, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. It was almost all of the modest inheritance Harold left me when he died last year. For months we'd talked me aloud into the quiet of the living room, as if he might answer back, about young men who drift, about kids who need mentors, about a church that could be more than a building on Sunday. Giving that money felt right. It felt like carrying on what Harold would have wanted. I dressed the way I always do when I go to First Grace. Navy suit, low leather shoes. The pearl brooch Harold insisted I keep in the top drawer with the napkins. Pearls were small things, but they mattered. They held his voice in them. The memory of his hand resting at the small of my back as we walked down the aisle decades ago. I pinned the brooch on and adjusted the collar in the hallway mirror until my posture was as erect as he'd taught me to be. On the drive over, the morning air smelled like late summer grass and a hint of wood smoke. The church bell tolled twice as I turned into the parking lot. That sound has always steadied me. A low, honest tone that seemed to mark time the way a heartbeat does. I thought about the altar as I crossed the sidewalk. The altar cloth is white at First Grace, always ironed smooth. A single brass candle sits to one side, its flame steady and small. Behind it, the curtain over the choir loft is that deep burgundy. At coffee hour I folded napkins at the refreshment table, arranging the cookies Martha had baked. The room smelled of cinnamon and brewed coffee and polished hymnals. People came by, Diane with her bright laugh, Judith, who always had a note about the choir, Rebecca, who slipped me a small smile as she balanced the church ledger. Rebecca's face lined around the eyes is the kind I trusted. She's been our treasurer for years, a steady presence with her tablet tucked under her arm. Nothing then hinted at the rot I would later find. I sat in the third pew at 9, the place I had sat for 25 years. The sun through the stained glass would fall on my knees in a scatter of color, and I liked to watch the reds and blues settle on my hands. The choir warmed up. The organ breathed in a slow, familiar way. I listened to the choir leader call the hymn, felt the grain of the pew under my palm. Around me were faces that had been part of my life for decades. People who'd sent casseroles when Harold was sick, women who'd knitted baby blankets, men who'd lent advice and tools and sometimes a truck. We had a history. There were small things that I filed away then and only later saw for what they were. Nathan, young, earnest Nathan, who'd been a deacon for just a few months, seemed distracted. He checked his phone too often, a quick dart of the eyes. Pastor Grayson's hand lingered a bit longer than usual on the pulpit, as if smoothing not only the sermon notes but something else. The youth program poster in the vestibule had a new logo taped crookedly on the corner. Some evenings the light in the youth room stayed on long after practice. Little oddities that, in the hum of Sunday, I let slide. That afternoon I made tea and sat with Harold's photograph, tracing the familiar lines of his face on the glass frame. I thought about the kids. I thought about the program sign-up board with its yellowing paper, and the empty slots that were supposed to be filled by volunteers. Giving that money felt like filling a hole. If you asked me then whether I imagined my name whispered as a threat, whether I thought my generosity could be twisted into offense, I would have laughed. I only wanted what Harold and I had always wanted. A chance for someone to be steadier, kinder, stronger than they might otherwise be. The curtain at the back of the choir loft, the empty pew near the column, the brass candle on the altar, all those small sensible things seemed to promise the same dependable goodness they always had. 2 days later the pew was taken away from me. The curtain swallowed the light. The brass candle kept flickering, indifferent. The small weight of the check had shifted into something no longer comforting, and I realized that in a room full of faithful people, there are secrets that live in the cracks of the floorboards. Still, I remember the morning before like a warm hand on my sleeve, ordinary, honest, and hopeful. And in that memory I find the courage I needed when the choir quieted and every eye turned my way. I felt the weight of every head in the room before his hand even touched my shoulder. The pews smelled of polished wood and weak coffee, the organ humming under the hymn like a slow, steady breath. My fingers were pressed so hard into the navy fabric that I could feel the seams. The pearl brooch Harold had insisted I wear caught the slant of light from the stained glass and flashed once. A small, accusing glimmer. "Mrs. Wilkins, could you come with me?" Pastor Grayson's voice was low, practiced. It wasn't a request. He guided me down the aisle as if steering a boat through a crowded harbor. People glanced, quick, careful looks that tried not to seem like looks. Diane's smile from the doorway stopped at her mouth. Martha's hand hovered at her scarf and then dropped. The hymn swelled and all I heard was my own breath, quick and shallow. "Here will be better for you today," he said, indicating the last pew tucked by a column. He set my hand there with a gentleness that felt like a line being drawn on the floor. "But, Pastor," the words came out small and brittle. My throat tightened. The organ held a note that seemed to hang between us. I pressed my palms flat on my knees to stop them from shaking. The wood under my fingers felt cool, solid. Harold taught me to stand straight, to meet things with a steady back. I tried to straighten, but my shoulders trembled. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. After the service he asked me into his office. The room smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper. A wooden cross hung above his desk. He closed the door and sat with both hands folded over a Bible like someone who wanted to hold the world steady. "Eleanor," he began, voice soft, almost apologetic. "I have great respect for you, but it's come to my attention that your donation may have complications." Complications. The word hit like cold rain. 2 days earlier I'd folded the check into an envelope the way we fold prayers. $25,000 from a small inheritance Harold left me. Money that I had imagined translating directly into mentors, field trips, a chance for a kid to find a better path. "I was told you suggested conditions," he said. "Nathan mentioned you wanted influence over the program, that you were investing in his future." The color drained from my hands. I could feel my pulse at the base of my throat, a tight, urgent drum. "I never said that," I said. "I only said I'd like to see young people given more opportunities. If Nathan wanted to lead. Please, Eleanor." He touched the Bible, then the watch at his wrist, then smiled that same practiced smile. "I'm willing to return the donation. It would avoid fuss." Return the donation. As if money could erase the stain of suspicion they had chosen to lay on me. As if they'd think it better to hand back a gift than to look closely at the darker corners. I left the office feeling hollowed out, the sound of the church doors heavy behind me. The parking lot felt too bright. My bag buzzed, a dry, startling vibration. A text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Wilkins, we need to talk about your donation and Nathan. Library parking, 15 minutes. Nathan." The name struck like a stone dropped into still water. My knees went soft. Panic is a still, cold thing. It settled in my stomach and made my hands go numb. I walked toward the library lot because the text didn't say no. It said meet. Rebecca waited by her car, holding a tablet like a shield. She tucked her glasses up the bridge of her nose in that nervous way she always does when she's about to say something she wished she didn't have to say. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and stale church coffee. She looked older, smaller. "I didn't know how to tell you," she murmured. Her voice was low enough that the engine noises swallowed it. She opened the tablet and turned it so I could see. The screen showed lines of emails and ledger entries. Dates. Amounts. A transfer annotated in Nathan's handwriting. $10,000, moved to a personal account and masked as youth program expenses. A trail traced out in digits and timestamps. Not a dramatic revelation but a slow, patient uncovering. Rebecca's finger hovered over a row like someone not wanting to press down on a wound. "It started small," she said. "I thought maybe it was an error. Then patterns." She swallowed. Her glasses caught the sun. "When your check came, he panicked. He was afraid you'd look." A hot flush rose in me, then a cold clarity. If Nathan had been siphoning funds, my money threatened to expose an empty ledge under their feet. If he could plant a whisper that I intended to buy influence, he could redirect suspicion away from himself. The picture formed not with thunder but with the quiet inevitability of rot exposed. For a long second I just held the tablet and listened to the parking lot. A car door, a distant siren. A child laughing far away like nothing inside the church had shifted. My hands were steady now, not from calm but from decision. I felt Harold like a hand at my back. His voice in some old corner telling me truth was stubborn. I walked back into the parish hall with the tablet under my arm. The room smelled of soup and folding chairs and the faint wax of a floor buffed every month. Conversations dimmed as heads turned. The brooch at my collar felt heavy. A small steady weight anchoring me. I placed Rebecca's tablet on the folding table between the folding chairs and the coffee urn. I let the quiet sit over them for a moment. Let them find their place in it. "Pastor Grayson," I said, my voice measured. "I think we need to talk about the youth program." I set the tablet on the folding table like placing a small coffin. The screen lit the coffee-stained tablecloth, numbers and dates marching across it in a pale glow. For a moment the room only breathed. Someone's necklace clicked when they swallowed. The hum of the overhead lights felt loud. Pastor Grayson straightened from the coffee urn, that practiced calm folding itself. Nathan's face went pale. He looked like a man trying to remember which script he was supposed to be following. He checked his phone. The movement was nervous, too quick. His fingers tapped the edge of his chair. He looked at his father as if waiting for permission to disappear. Rebecca adjusted her glasses. Her hands were steady. Her voice carried the same level, calm and precise. "I ran the accounts again," she said. "This is not an error. These transfers are marked as program expenses, but rerouted to an outside account. I began questioning small discrepancies months ago. When Mrs. Wilkins' donation came, records spiked." Nathan panicked. A few people shifted. Martha's hand twitched at her scarf and then folded over it, pretending to tidy a fold. Diane's smile had frozen like a photograph. Judith's mouth pressed into a thin line. You could feel loyalty and confusion and fear pooling in little eddies through the room. Pastor Grayson's jaw worked. He inhaled slowly, as if pulling oxygen would pull back the moment. "If there are discrepancies," he said, "we will look into them properly. We must be careful not to." His sentence thinned and fell away. "Not careful enough for me." I remembered the office, the lemon cleaner. His offer to return the donation as if that could make any slight vanish. I remembered how his smile had not reached his eyes. My palms went clammy. I pressed them together to still the tremor. "Properly means transparency," I said. The words surprised me by how steady they were. "It means a review. It means we don't sweep things under the rug for the sake of appearances." A murmur threaded across the room, quiet, shocked. The old men on the folding chairs leaned forward. People I had known since my first Sunday here looked as if a photograph of the church had been slid under the light and revealed cracks they had believed invisible. Pastor Grayson stepped closer to the table. "This is an allegation," he said. His voice held a warning now, the kind that seeks to corral a flock. Accusations without context can do harm. To families. To ministries. His hand brushed the Bible. I saw the watch at his wrist flick in the light. Timekeeping. Control. Nathan swallowed. He ran one hand through his hair, then rubbed the bridge of his nose. Small gestures, but they said what he would not. The room smelled like lemon cleaner and hot soup and the thin metallic tang of adrenaline. "Then let the context be examined," Rebecca said. She lifted the tablet so others could see. "Open the accounts. Follow the transfers. If there's an explanation, we will hear it. If not," Pastor Grayson cut in, voice sharp now like something brittle breaking, "we will handle it internally. We will not let this become fodder for gossip." Gossip. The word was a net he tried to throw over the truth. He was protecting something, his son, his reputation, the institution, and it showed in the small cramped way his hands curled around the Bible. His eyes flicked to Nathan, then away. I thought of Harold's hands, calloused, honest hands that would have gripped my shoulders and said, "Stand up, Eleanor." I straightened. I let my breathing slow until the rhythm in my chest matched the organ's low note humming somewhere in the back of the building. "Handling it internally has been the problem," I said. The room drew a breath like a held thing. "We have been handling things for months." A woman near the back whispered the word audit like an invocation. It landed in the air and didn't die. Heads turned toward the elders' table where Mr. Hargrove, on the council for as long as anyone could remember, sat with his hands folded. His expression was a photograph of consternation. He cleared his throat. "We need facts," he said, which was both obvious and a lifeline. "We need a committee. We need transparency. For the sake of the children." There it was, the word children, and something like guilt moved across faces. The youth program had been the promise. The ledger numbers suddenly felt like small betrayals of those faces. Teenagers with nervous smiles at summer camps, kids reaching for mentors. People's mouths softened. Eyes that had been hard softened with concern. Pastor Grayson's posture went from control to entreaty. "There's grace to consider," he murmured. "Please, let us not vilify a family." Nathan's hands began to tremble. His face crumpled for a second like old paper, and then he forced a laugh that sounded wrong. "I can explain," he said. The words were too quick, too practiced. They did not fit the shape of a man who had been caught. Rebecca's gaze did not waver. "Explain the transfers," she said. Her voice had the kind of quiet that is a hinge. "Explain where the money went." He looked at his father. The father looked away. For a breath, the room was a photograph of the two of them, one man in his 60s with a pulpit voice and a watch, and another much younger man whose hands shook as if the weight of what he'd done had become something physical he could not hold. No one raised a hand to call for the police or shout accusations. It was smaller, more devastating. It was a congregation deciding whether to keep sheltering its own or to pry the boards up and see rot. I felt my knees steady under me. Harold's picture in my living room felt warm in the back of my mind, smiling as if proud I'd chosen the harder thing. I placed my hand over the tablet like sealing an envelope. "We will have a meeting," Mr. Hargrove said. "A church meeting. We will invite outside review. Until then, Nathan, you should step back from youth duties." Nathan's shoulders slumped in a way that was more confession than words. His eyes, when he looked at me, were filled with something like apology and fear. Pastor Grayson's face was unreadable. Anger and sorrow braided together. It wasn't a resolved ending. It was a pulled thread. But there was motion now, light sliding into cracks. In my head a photograph kept replaying, the pearl at my collar catching the morning sun. I breathed, tasted coffee and lemon, and felt, for the first time since that hand on my shoulder, that perhaps the room might tilt toward truth. After that Sunday, the change didn't come as one big slam door. It arrived in 100 small surgical motions. A hand that lingered half a second too little. A hello that thinned into a nod. I began to feel it in the foyer, in the soft thud of my shoes on linoleum, in the way the air seemed to fold around me when I passed the refreshment table. Coffee hour used to be my soft place. People drifted by, plates in hand, and stories unspooled like ribbons. Now the urn was a line of steam and strangers. Diane would say, "Oh, Eleanor, so glad you came," and then step around the table as if afraid to brush crumbs from my sleeve. Her laugh hit the air like a bell with the clapper missing. Familiar but hollow. You learn people by their small betrayals. Judith no longer asked about the choir robes. She walked with the purpose of someone trying not to look back. Martha, my Martha, who'd brought casseroles when Harold was ill and whose hand had helped pin my brooch before every holiday service. Her eyes slid past me like glass. Once she used to sit near me, fingers worrying a handkerchief. Now she found reasons to head for the side door. As if the church had become a gallery she no longer belonged in. Whispers circled like moths. I would catch fragments. Too much appearance. Trying to buy favor. Words that once landed like small stones now felt like heavy pebbles thrown into a shallow pond, each ripple widening until it reached me on the bench. People spoke in that odd, muffled hush churches invent to keep gossip pretend pious. Heads inclined. Mouths moved. No one looked me in the eyes. Phones that used to ring with invitations to bake sales or book club meetings went silent. I checked messages after lunch, each unanswered call a small paper cut. The church directory sat on my kitchen table like an accusation. Numbers I had dialed without thinking no longer answered. I found myself rehearsing conversations in the mirror before I called, then putting the phone down because I didn't want to hear a cautious voice give me the kind of polite distance that tastes like vinegar. Even the Sunday bulletin felt foreign. My name, once printed in acknowledgments for coffee ministry and bake auctions, had been moved, then left out. The youth program board, where we once scrawled names for chaperones and mentors, now bore a pale list of volunteers circled in a hand that wasn't mine. The poster in the vestibule that used to make me smile had been taped differently, the corners curled as if hurriedly restuck. Small humiliations piled until they made. What made it sharper was the way the physical space of the church seemed to change. Where once the light through the stained glass hit my knees like a private blessing, it now carved me out and left me visible from a place of distance. The choir loft seemed higher. The smiles nearer, the altar smaller. People who had once leaned into conversations now kept shoulders squared, as if preparing to step back from whatever they might catch if they reached across me. I began to notice things I hadn't before. The scent of lemon cleaner more frequent in the narthex, as if someone were trying to scrub more than tables. The nervous way the pastor straightened his tie in passing. The way Nathan's phone battery seemed to die at the precise moment a conversation could get inconvenient. It irritated me at first, the slowness of their cowardice, until the irritation gave way to a cold, steady isolation that felt less like grief and more like exile. And yet, inside that quiet, something else gathered. The absence of casual kindness made room for a fierce clarity. When Martha shifted away from me at the potluck, I did not slump or plead. I folded my napkin, pressed my fingers around it until the fabric left an imprint, and learned how to be present without being owned by their pity or their fear. When the church phone did not ring, I made a list of names I would call anyway. Not to defend myself, not yet, but to map what remained. Rebecca's avoidance was the kind that bites. She would offer a small, distracted smile in the doorway, and then turn back into the office, keeping the tablet like a shield. I felt her steps in the halls, then felt them recede. There were nights I rode past the library, the one with the cracked pavement and the tired lamplight, thinking maybe a stranger's number would buzz in my pocket with a word of explanation. Nothing came. Isolation has a scent. Old hymnals, a faint coffee, the lemon of an office before its secrets are aired. It settles into your clothes and makes you small in your shoes. People treat you as though you are fragile china bumped in a crowded kitchen, admired for your shape at a distance, but too dangerous to hold. Sometimes, in the hollow half-hour after service, I would stand by the door and watch them file out in small groups. Faces I had known for decades clustered in small islands of conversation. Laughter rippled and folded around words I could no longer place myself in. A boy from youth group would pass with a drumstick in his hand and stare at the floor more than at the door. An elderly couple would walk slowly, their arms linked, and the woman would glance at me as if calculating the risk of kindness. The world had been rearranged around an accusation that wasn't mine. But isolation sharpens things. In the quiet, I began to pick at the seams of what they'd said. The whispers had to come from somewhere. The trajectory of avoidance made patterns. Where one door closed, another stubborn and narrower opened. A tablet left unguarded. A ledger that made no sense. A glance that lasted a fraction too long. The lack of voices around me taught me to listen differently. So I sat with the silence until it became a tool. I practiced the kind of courage that doesn't need witnesses. I learned to move through rooms like someone whose feet have learned a new path. Not away from God or people, but toward a truth I could no longer ignore. The room was fuller than it looked on paper. Folding chairs lined in rows, the parish hall's fluorescent lights humming like a held breath. The smell of lukewarm coffee mixed with lemon cleaner and the faint wax of the tablecloth. My hands were folded so tightly around Rebecca's tablet that the skin at my knuckles went white. I kept counting my breaths under my tongue, 1, 2. As if breath could steady what my eyes were about to see. Pastor Grayson stood behind the small podium, that same careful posture he took for every sermon. His voice began to rise, the way it always did when he wanted the room to lean in. The vibration in his throat carried like a chord through the hall, echoing off cinderblock walls, drawing quiet over the group. It sounded like a sermon at the start. Warm, practiced, magnetic. But there was an edge. A tremor he couldn't smother. An almost apologetic tightness. "We must be careful with words," he said. The note of authority tried to smooth the air. The organ I could hear faintly from the church felt far away, a heartbeat under his sentences. His eyes kept drifting to Nathan. Nathan kept looking at his phone. The young man's fingers tapped the chair arm like a timekeeper. I felt the heat behind my eyes, an old familiar pressure I learned to hide at Harold's funeral. I breathed in slow, keeping my voice small, keeping my hands folded on the tablet until my fingers ached. My palms smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and the tablet's plastic. I let the silence pool between his sentences. Let the congregation fill it like water. Perhaps an explanation will help, Pastor Grayson said. His voice wavered, sank, then tried to climb. It was the sermon rhythm, call, pause, lift, but there was no scripture to save him now. Rebecca's hand brushed mine. She nodded, and I placed the tablet flat on the folding table. The screen cast a pale glow that looked oddly cruel against the paper napkins and coffee stains. I slid it toward him as if pushing a small truth into polite hands. Numbers do not shout. They are stubborn, patient things. The entries marched across the screen. Dates, transfers, a note in Nathan's hand. Youth program expenses. 10,000 moved to a private account. The decimals were small and indifferent. The room leaned forward as if breath alone could make them larger. Nathan's laugh sounded then, too quick, too brittle. It broke something in the air like a small crack spreading through glass. He stood abruptly. The metal chair scraped like a knife. A ripple of noise moved along the rows. That scraping was the sound that set off everything. There was a gust from the side door as someone left, and the little votive on the table by the refreshments guttered. The flame went black as a breath taken away. For a second the room went colder. The glow of the tablet seemed almost obscene in that new dimness. Someone's elbow knocked the candle cup. The wax made a soft, sick, sweet smell, and then nothing. Only the hum of lights and the metallic patience of the moment. Pastor Grayson's hand tightened on the podium. He reached for the Bible in that old reflex like a signal. His voice attempted to reclaim the sermon cadence. Appeal, mercy, grace, but it felt thin. I could hear the timbre change, the vibration now threaded with something like pleading. Eleanor, he said, too softly. Accusations. Not accusations, I answered, and the sound of my own voice surprised me with its steadiness. My hands were still pressed together. My nails left lines in my palms. I kept breathing in the small hollow of my chest, slow and deliberate. Documentation. Rebecca found the transfers. A murmur swelled, thin, uncertain. Someone shifted their chair. A necklace clinked. A cough tried to cover itself. Faces rearranged in the light. The organ's low note seemed to come through the wall as if the sanctuary itself wished it could lean in. Nathan's face was paper. He opened his mouth, closed it, then pounded out a sentence that sounded rehearsed. I can explain, he said. His voice scraped like a hand on varnish. He made a sudden movement toward the table, and the edge caught the crucifix that hung on the little shelf by the refreshments. The wooden cross tilted, then slipped. It fell with that awful smallness, less noise than a blot on quiet. The crucifix hit the floor and rolled once, the figure on it facing up as if exposed. The sound was a soft, absolute punctuation. No one moved for a heartbeat. Then eyes flicked like birds between the fallen cross, Nathan, and the tablet like it was a mirror reflecting something they'd refused to see. I felt something loosen inside me. Not triumph, no, but the shift of a weight balanced on a shelf being taken away. I heard Harold's laugh in the corner of my memory, small and startling. Go on, love. My throat tightened. I folded my hands again until the lines of my palms burned. Pastor Grayson's voice reassembled itself, now edged with the brittle insistence of defense. We will look into this, he said, each word measured as if they were stones he might throw into a pond to stop ripples. But we cannot. We must not. We must, Rebecca cut in, calm as ledger ink. She lifted the tablet so others could see. Follow the transfers. Open the accounts. If there's an explanation, show it. If not, we stop pretending. Silence filled the space like a new curtain. The lights hummed. Someone whispered a prayer that sounded like a question. I felt the congregation's breath held with me. Mr. Hargrove called for a special meeting that week. He insisted we bring in an outside accounting firm. Someone with no ties to our church, no reason to protect anyone. Felt formal in a way that I needed. Formality can be a kind of mercy. It puts distance between rumor and proof. They came from a firm 2 towns over. Men and women in plain suits, laptops open, the faint smell of strong coffee trailing them. Rebecca handed over the church file she'd kept on her tablet. She had printed copies, neat stacks bound with paper clips. The auditors worked like careful gardeners pulling weeds. Small, methodical movements. They followed a trail of numbers from our ledger to a bank account in Nathan Grayson's name. He had marked transfers, youth program expenses. On paper it looked like care. When you followed the paper to the bank, it looked like something else. A series of personal withdrawals, ATM slips, and transfers to places that had nothing to do with kids and mentorship. They brought bank statements. They brought timestamps that matched the emails Rebecca had saved. They printed one particular line, bold and clean in the fluorescent light. A $10,000 transfer annotated with Nathan's handwriting. The paper smelled faintly of ink and office air. The congregation gathered around the long table like a court, but no one called for judgment. We waited for a human voice. Nathan came to the meeting because Pastor Grayson told him he should. He sat at the end of the table like someone trying to make himself small. His face had the kind of colorlessness shame paints on people. For a while he didn't speak. His fingers found his phone and dropped it, again and again, as if dropping it would silence whatever he'd done. When the auditors laid the documents on the table, the room didn't need to be told what to see. Numbers are patient things, they do not plead. The ledger and the bank statements fit together like 2 halves of the same map. The proof was not dramatic. It was a quiet, steady tiling of dates and amounts and an account number that led straight to him. He folded in toward himself and then finally said the words, stumbling, small, almost embarrassed. He spoke of pressure, of mistakes that had snowballed. He said he'd been afraid to ask for help, afraid of explaining how deep the hole was. He said he wanted to be a pastor like his father, but he had been trying to be something else, and along the way he had chosen wrong. Confession did not fix the ledger. It did not make the money reappear. But confession broke the quiet that had protected the act. Pastor Grayson listened with his hands folded as if steadying a single fragile thing. He did not speak immediately. I watched him, the practiced pulpit voice replaced by a man grown thin around the edges. He announced, in a voice that tried to be even, that he would step back from his duties while we conducted the audit and sought restitution where possible. He used the phrase reassess his ministry. It was the phrase they had used before, gentle and bureaucratic. But this time it came with weight. He offered no sermon-sauced apology. He offered to cooperate. He let his son be asked to step away from the youth program. Nathan entered a program for counseling and financial rehabilitation a few weeks later. There was no fanfare. There were phone calls, quiet arrangements, a drive to a clinic in another county. Some of the money the auditors recovered was modestly returned. Other sums could not be reclaimed. We set up a fund to stabilize the youth program while donors and members made decisions about how to move forward. We started, finally, to build a paper trail that could not be redirected. What surprised me was not the fall of men I trusted, but the way people kept coming to the table after. Some looked downcast. Some looked betrayed. But many looked determined. Mr. Hargrove called for transparency. Rebecca would not be shuffled aside. She became the person who helped steer our accounting into the light. Diane and a surprising number of others, women and men who had once slid away, began showing up to meetings not to defend or to judge, but to listen and to learn. Apologies came. Some were halting, awkward. Martha found me one afternoon in the kitchen with the coffee urn and took my hand. Her fingers were bony and warm. "Eleanor," she said, and then she said nothing else, but the touch said what speech had not dared. Diane's smile returned, softer, and when she hugged me she did it without that photograph greeting distance she'd kept. There were also absences that apology couldn't mend. Some doors stayed closed. Some invitations never came. That kind of fracture doesn't heal with an audit or a confession. It sings in the silence of empty pews and the awkward space of coffee hours. You learn to live with what doesn't come back. 6 months on, the youth program looks different. There are new volunteers, younger leadership trained with oversight. You can hear laughter now, loud, real, not the hemmed-in kind. They meet in a refurbished room with the proper sign and receipts stapled into binders. The kids are not proof against pain, but they have people who are accountable. That matters to me more than any return check. I still sit toward the back sometimes. Not because someone made me go there, but because from that spot I can watch the room and see the whole picture. The pearl brooch still rests where Harold pinned it years ago. It catches the light the same way, patient and unflinching. I feel a quiet in me that is not the absence of grief, but its companion. A steadier air. Truth did not come as a spectacle. It came because a woman with a tablet would not let small discrepancies be smoothed over. It came because some people chose transparency over preservation. It did not give me back everything that was lost. Not dignity. Not the years where smiles felt like politeness. But it gave me this. A space where the children's voices could be heard without being muffled by a ledger hidden in the dark. There is no neat final page. Healing is a long, awkward work. But when I leave service now, I do so with the feeling that the room tilts a little more toward what it promises to be. A place where mistakes are faced, not hushed. Where repentance is paired with repair. Where faith at last is about more than good seats or quiet blessings. Harold would have liked that. He would have told me to keep my back straight and my heart open. And maybe that is the kind of grace we all need. The pew beside the aisle is empty. Sunlight slips through the stained glass and lays a slow, colored band across the varnished wood. My pearl brooch catches that light and throws back a small stubborn gleam like an answer. I come on Sundays out of habit and out of choice. Habit, because 67 years of mornings teach a body where to go. Choice, because now I sit where I can see everything. The third row is still there, polished and familiar. But the last pew has become a place of watchfulness, not exile. From here I watch faces as they arrive, the way young people laugh with unguarded mouths, the way elders slow their steps and fold their hands as if tucking a day into their pockets. The smell in the narthex is always a collage, coffee, lemon cleaner. The wax tang of polished floors. It used to feel like a map of small betrayals. Now it feels like a map of work underway. The lemon is still present, but it no longer seems like an eraser. It's the cleaner you use after a spill. A sign someone cared enough to wipe something away and start again. When the service ends, footsteps move in the swell of a river. I used to count them. 1, 2, 3, each step a witness that had turned away. Now I pay attention to the cadence, the shy ones, the loud ones, the ones that keep rhythm with a child skipping. Today a mother tugs her boy's hand and tells him, "Sing out, okay?" He belts his tiny triumph of a hymn and the sound ricochets. Boats on a bright river. I smooth the edge of the hymn book because the paper likes to curl under my fingers. I tuck my hands palms down to feel the grain. Harold taught me once to notice wood, how it remembers the weight of people who sit and pray there. I think of him often when my mind quiets. His small steady laugh, the way he would arrange the napkins for potluck as if folding peace into them. He would have said this is the work of ordinary courage. And then he would have asked if I wanted a cup of coffee. There are still absences. Some faces that belong to our weekend rows no longer come. That leaves an ache like a pew missing a slat, noticeable only when you pause long enough. Apologies returned that were hesitant. Warm hands that asked forgiveness in kitchen doorways. Some people slid back into friendship slow and careful, like someone learning a melody again. Others stayed away. Those doors stayed closed. I have learned how to keep my palms open anyway. Rebecca moves with a new steadiness now. She still tucks her glasses up when she's about to say something difficult, but there is less. On weekdays sometimes I come anyway, to tuck a few chairs, to straighten hymnals, to watch the youth room from the doorway. They have a new poster now, neat, stapled with receipts tucked into a binder on the shelf. The kids who come there laugh like something being repaired. That sound is not triumph. It is a daily small fidelity. It is the work of people who choose again and again to show up. The parish hall keeps a rhythm of its own. Folding chairs lean like a chorus waiting for a cue. The coffee urn hisses like a small steam engine turning out kindness. I pour for whoever comes. Sometimes the cup goes to a stranger who looks like he hasn't slept. Sometimes it goes to Diane, who has relearned the art of coming close. We drink, and the silence between us is not a chasm anymore but a shared pause. On days when the wind comes from the river, the back door lets it in and papers stir like a single breath. I watch the door close at the end of the day, slow then decisive. There was a time when that sound felt like a lock being slammed. Now it sounds like a curtain falling after a scene that needed to end. The click of that latch is small, simple, decisive. Walking home, I feel the cool seam of evening press against my coat. The town smells of cut grass and something someone is grilling down the block. I can still taste the lemon in my mouth from the office, but it has the softness of someone who has put in the work. The bell at First Grace rings twice as I pass. It sounds steadier than it used to. It does not promise a tidy ending. Promises return. I often think that healing is not a grand thing but a series of small returns. A volunteer who comes back to teach, a ledger that is open on a table, a son who learns to ask for help. The pews will always hold the dents of what happened. Wood remembers the weight of those who sat on it. But dents can be polished until they are part of the grain, part of the story of a place that has been walked through fire and not lost its name. That night, as the last light fades and the hymnals close with a soft, final thump, I stand by the door and listen to the echo of my own footsteps as I leave. They sound ordinary, the sound of someone who has kept their balance. The wind lifts and for a second the narthex smells like warm coffee, lemon, and the green of early spring. The door clicks shut behind me. It is a small sound. It is, in its way, a kind of benediction. The door did not close on us. It closed around the moment that needed to pass so something else could begin. I fold my hands and feel the smoothness of the pearl where Harold pinned it, patient, a little sore from holding its light. I walk home under the stretch of sky that holds all the rest, and I think we are still here. We are still learning how to be honest. We are still slowly a place worth coming back to. I still feel the weight of that morning like a coin in my palm. Cold, metallic, impossible to swallow. The church bell rings the same way it always did, the low double toll that used to steady me, and now it steadies me in a different rhythm. Not because everything was fixed neatly, but because the room has been opened enough to let light do what light does. Find the rot and show it. Sitting at the back is a choice now. From here I can watch the whole room breathe. I can see the children barreling into Sunday school, cheeks red with the small bravery of being young. I can see Rebecca at the accounts table, glasses pushed up, face focused. I see Mr. Hargrove making notes like someone untangling a fine, knotted rope. I see Diane approaching, tentative, then closing the space between us with a hand on my arm that says more than words ever did. People ask me if it hurt, if the whispers, the sidelong glances, the small hospitalities that stop being hospitable, cut me in ways that never mend. Yes, they did. The hardest part was how ordinary it felt to be pushed out, as if someone had merely rearranged the furniture, and not realized a person sat in the chair they moved. The humiliation was quiet. Coffee cups set too far away. Chairs crossed in a path to avoid passing me. It was a slow subtraction of presence. In the evenings my house felt twice as large because a chair at my table was empty where a friend should have sat. But inside that ache came a clarity I hadn't expected. When things are stripped away, you notice the seams. I began listening more than speaking. I learned the names of people who worked the night before a fundraiser, the pattern of deposits in the ledger, the way Nathan's phone lit up at odd hours. Small things folded into a map. Confrontation did not arrive like a thunderstorm. It was a small, stubborn march. A tablet laid on a table, ledger lines that refused to be smoothed over, a fallen crucifix that sounded more like truth than drama. The meeting that followed was not a spectacle of righteous anger. It was paperwork and coffee and the slow, grinding machinery of accountability. Nathan's apology, awkward, halting, was a human thing. Embarrassed, frightened, not a villain's confession. His path toward help has been slow. He sits in group sessions now, scribbling on line paper. He writes letters that smell faintly of nervous cologne and remorse. Some of the money found its way back. Some did not. The ledger is honest now, and honesty is an odd kind of repair. Pastor Grayson stepped back. He used the words reassess his ministry. We used the words transparency and audit. Language mattered. It steadied people who wanted to stay, and it made room for the ones who needed to go. There are still empty seats on Sundays. There are still faces that turn away. But there are also faces that have returned, slower, softer, with questions instead of assumptions. That counts. I think often about Harold in these quiet moments. His laugh that sounded like permission, his hands that taught me how to fold a napkin with care. He would have called this a practical mercy, not the dramatic kind you read about in books, but the kind that arrives in receipts, in paperwork cross-checked, in people saying, "We will do better." He would have grumbled about the lemon cleaner in the narthex and then winked as if we were alone. He would have told me to stand straight and maybe, if I was lucky, to have a second cup of coffee. Faith for me proved to be smaller and stranger than I expected. It did not protect me from being hurt. It did not guarantee the warmth of neighbors. But it gave me a place to stand when I decided to walk back into a room full of people who had watched me be pushed aside. My trust shifted from a building and a name to the people within it, the ones willing to choose transparency over preservation. That was the hardest conversion of all. To turn from reverence for an institution to reverence for truth. There were moments when bitterness wanted to live in me. I let it visit, but I would not give it a house. Instead, I poured that energy into small, stubborn acts. Showing up to youth meetings, keeping receipts, asking questions in council gatherings. I learned to speak without being loud. I learned to sit where I could see the whole, not where I was told to be hidden. I learned that courage sometimes looks like a woman placing a tablet on a table and letting numbers do the talking for her. The kids in the new program laugh differently now, not braced, not watching if adults will let them fall. They run into rooms with posters stapled neatly and binders of receipts stacked like promises. Volunteers sign logs and initial them, and someone keeps the coffee hot in a thermos with the label. These are small things, but they are the bones of trust. They are the modest architecture of repair. Not everything mended. Some friendships loosen beyond repair. Holidays were lonelier. Manners sometimes replaced warmth. Grief has a long tail, and mine winds through empty pews and quiet Thanksgiving tables. But there is also repair, slow, patient, the kind that looks like accounting meetings and hands offered unhesitatingly when they are needed. I have learned that truth is not loud. It is steady, insistent. It grows like a small houseplant in a corner, unnoticed until someone bends to water it. It is messy, stubborn, and not nearly as cinematic as we imagine. Still, it is the thing that saves children from being collateral to grown-up sins. It is the thing that turns a ledger into a map rather than a cloak. So I keep going back. I straighten hymnals, I pour coffee, I listen. From the back I can see the whole room. The way light catches faces and mistakes. The pearl at my collar still glints like a small answer. Sometimes the congregation is brave. Sometimes it is not. Sometimes the door closes on people who won't return. Sometimes it opens. In the end, I learned to trust the long work more than the quick apology. I learned that being shouted at or moved to the back doesn't define you, what you do after does. And the secret I come away with, the one I've held quiet for months until it felt like its own small prayer, is this: truth kept in the dark grows heavy. Truth brought. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.